Welcome back to another episode of Advice from Your Advocates. This is a show where we talk with those in the long-term care industry and those that care for seniors and find interesting guests and interesting topics. So I'm Bob Manner from Manner Law Group, a certified elder law attorney in Michigan. And today our guest is Jodi Colombe, from a sales manager at Brookdale, Blanc Assisted Living and Memory Care. And I've known Jodi for a bit, and I know that she has a great passion for seniors and that she's worked in this industry for quite a while. Jodi, where would you say that passion came from? How did you get into this field?
Well, when I was probably in about fourth grade, my mom enrolled me in an adopt a grandparent program. My grandparents lived out of state, and she just wanted that bond to begin. And so it started with once a week for about an hour, and it very quickly turned into several days a week. So I started with one grandmother and had, many very soon after.
That's great. That's fantastic. And so how long have you been at Brookdale now?
I have been here about 5 years, and it's been great because I've gotten exposure in independent living, assisted living, specialized memory care. So it helps families if we're not the best next step. I have a very strong connection with how to help and be a resource.
And I know Brookdale is a very strong organization and has buildings throughout the country, I believe, if that's accurate. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about the Brookdale here in Grand Blanc and what services you offer.
So you're correct in that we are the largest senior living provider in the United States. On our campus here, we have two buildings, an assisted living community and a memory care community. So you can truly age in place no matter where, life takes you as far as your, cognitive support needed. And some of our residents here at the assisted living side are completely independent. They don't have a care plan yet. Mm-hmm. And they like to, just kind of ease in and take advantage of not having to cook or clean. And then when they need a care plan, then they already know all of us and can get the care they need.
And Jodi, I want to get back to that in a little bit because I think there is a lot of confusion about the different levels of care. And sometimes people just think, okay, if you leave your house, you're off to a nursing home. And we all know that that's not accurate. And there's multiple levels of care. But I want to put that question off for a little bit and kind of build back up to that. Let's talk a little bit about it from the standpoint of if you're you have a family member, and what are some of the sort of red flags or warning signs that, hey, we might need to be kind of thinking about a different level of care, or even starting to consider care, whether it be in the home or in a care setting. What are some of the initial signs that families should be looking out for?
I would say they're, both physical and mental. Maybe you notice that, weight loss or fatigue that is unusual for yourself or someone you love. It's easy to get in the habit of not cooking nutritious meals and, spending more time on the couch. And if you're living alone, not being very active, or maybe just withdrawn and you're not, they're declining invitations to things they normally would enjoy and just kind of isolating themselves.
It's interesting. Obviously, memory issues would come into that. And I know when in talking to medical professionals and different social workers and things like that, that some of the times when we're worried about memory issues, one of the things that they always check for is depression, which is very interesting because I think that's not intuitive that we would be looking for depression. But if you think about it, a lot of times maybe their spouse had died in the last few years or recently. They're kind of secluded, especially during COVID, not getting a lot of interaction and activity. And one of the things that I think can help with depression is having a community, is having people to have lunch with and having activities and having outings and things like that. And most seniors, if they're in their home, they don't get that, even though they have loving family that come by, but it's not quite the same as having a community of your peers, of similar age and circumstances. So I do think that can help with depression too.
Absolutely. And we can talk all day long about how hard it is to lose your spouse of, 50 plus years and go through different stages of, aging, but we don't know. We're not in that situation. But, when they're in a community, there's always a story of what people have gone through, similar things, loss of spouse, like you had said. And so there truly are a support system for one another.
I would often tell this story. This goes back many years when I was basically a kid, but I very distinctly recall my grandmother. They had lived up on near Traverse City on about 40 acres, and my grandfather had farmed a little, plot of property there for the longest time. Well, after he passed, she had lots of family visiting constantly,
Mhm.
but she was kind of secluded off in the middle of nowhere, and sure, there was family coming by and things like that. But when she got sick and went to a skilled care facility of all things, and we would visit her, and she says, "I love it here." And it was partly just because she was lonely. And yes, she had family, but just having that interaction, having people to care for her. And it was just a really eye-opening thing for me, because I think our culture tells us the opposite. So
Mhm.
many movies and culture and just this, I don't know, built-in guilt that says, "Oh no, mom has to stay in her house. That's the only best place. I'd never put her in someplace, put her in whatever that means."
Yes.
But my experience is most people have a better quality of life when they're not secluded like that, when they have people to
Mhm.
talk to and have lunch with and have interaction and have the Elvis impersonator come by or whoever the entertainer is going to
Yeah.
be that week. So wouldn't you agree on some of those?
Absolutely. And I think that everyone visualizes maybe what their parents, went to. And, it's this dim, cold environment, clinical, and
Yeah.
then when they get here, they're like, oh, wow, this is actually, it's warm and cozy and homey, and there's a lot of life here.
I
Um,
might be aging myself a little bit, but I always go back to that old movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I think people actually have that in their mind of,
mhm.
that's where we're sending mom, that's where we're sending dad, that's where I'm sending my spouse. And it is nothing like that. In fact,
Right.
when you get into an assisted living or memory care, it's completely different. You have your own space, you have, your own independence at whatever level is appropriate for you. And it's nothing like the terrible place that we have in our mind, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I hear that phrase often. I told my mom I would never put her in one of these. And
yeah.
it's, that mindset. It's like, no, this is actually a really great move. So,
That's been my experience. And so many times we've had families that we've worked with that have struggled greatly with the decision. And then, we'll talk to the family, or I'll even go visit the senior in their care setting 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months later. And the typical answer is, "I don't know why we didn't do this sooner. This is so much
mhm.
better." And I'm not saying that home care is not a good option, but often with the home care, you're still only seeing, one or two caregivers. You're just not having
Yeah.
that social interaction that you would have in more of a residential setting.
Mhm. Exactly.
So let's talk about this. And so, what would you advise a family? And I'm going to precursor this question a little bit. What would you advise a family that thinks it's time to start thinking about it or getting ready for it? And before
Mhm.
you answer that, I want to tell you my 2 cents on this, because typically I have lots of families that come in to see me and say, "Hey, we're not ready for this. We're not ready to change anything. We just want to know what this looks like." And a good portion of the time, as I get into the questions, they absolutely are ready for it. It's
Mhm.
almost necessary, and it's possibly even unsafe without getting some additional help. But it's just so hard for a family to wrap their head around this. So what would you advise a family that to try to, if in fact it is not, they're not quite ready for it, or if they're just trying to wrap their head around the idea that, okay, maybe mom doesn't need to live at home alone by herself, or dad live alone by himself anymore?
Mhm. And I think it's always best to research communities before you need to, but that's
Yeah.
much easier said than done, of course. But, I always say just schedule visits, and, physically go to communities, have a binder, and ask the same questions when you get in your car after the visit. Talk about how you felt when you were at the community. Tell your family members where you're putting that binder, include your notes, the information you've gathered during your visits, so that if it, when the time does come that the need is there, you have this every next step in place. And then at that point, you can narrow it down and make a good decision.
And I think that's a really good point. I advise folks of that all the time. I'm not sure how often people take me up on that advice, but I really do think you should know the community and know what options you have and know what the reputation of the different places are, and talk to people in the long-term care industry. But goes hand in hand with that is preparing financially for this. And one of the things, for example, for veterans benefits, it's important if you're expecting to get some veterans benefits to help pay for your care, which Brookdale and all the other places would be glad for you to get those veterans benefits to help pay for the care. A lot of times you have to prepare in advance. There's some legal documents and legal planning and structuring that you need to do in advance. So it's really something if you say, hey, we're perfectly fine, we're going to Europe next week, whatever it is, but we can see down the road, we can prepare for the future, and we want to make sure that we're prepared for this when the time does come, and it might be a few years from now. It's a good idea to meet with and do some legal planning to make sure that you're prepared and that you'd be eligible for any benefits that might help you pay for this care.
Absolutely, because things can happen very quickly, and you want to have everything in place, power of attorney, kind of that 5-year outlook on like your financials, and if you do qualify for veterans assistance, or if not, then, when will you?
Yeah.
If it's a matter of, spending down, and because you don't have time when something happens and it becomes an emergent situation. So you want to make sure that you're educated in all areas. If someone comes and visits here, that's where you're coming, Bob. Say, well, if you don't have a power of attorney in place yet, or these things, you really should do that, even if it's years ahead.
And that's a good point, because I find that people are needing this kind of assistance for longer than they expect. So a lot of times people think, okay, well, maybe I would need to move into an assisted living or memory care for, a year or two. But it might be 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. We don't know that. So even if you didn't plan ahead, then we should still do the planning. And so you mentioned a number of legal documents that are absolutely critical to have, but there's some additional planning, especially if you're a veteran or a spouse of a veteran or widow of a veteran, that we want to do in advance, because the VA has money for those people that served during Korea or Vietnam or World War II, any of those time periods, or their spouses or widows. But a lot of times financially, you have to plan ahead. So you don't always have to spend down. We just have to do some legal protections. And so even if it's too late to plan ahead, we don't know how long you're going to need this care for or need this assistance for. So sometimes at the beginning of that process, we should be looking at that, because you might need assistance for 3 years, 5 years, 6 years. We just don't know. I think people assume that this is going to be a short period of time. And I think in both of our experience, that's not necessarily true. Sometimes it might be 10 years for all we know.
Absolutely. And no one knows how long they're going to live, So, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And so what are some unexpected things that you've seen that families it might not be unexpected to you, but families are surprised by in sort of this transitioning process? And we talk about transitions a lot at our office, because sometimes that's the most difficult thing. As we get older, we kind of get set. My parents didn't really buy new mattresses or new furniture or new, it was just, this is what we had, and they kind of got set in their ways. And I like that mattress. Well, it's a horrible mattress, but that's the mattress I've had, and I like that mattress. Things like that, they kind of get set in their ways. And so transitions into something new can be very difficult for people. So what are some surprises that you have encountered, or you think that families are not expecting?
I think initially, it's very difficult. I mean, it's definitely not, we say it's going to be difficult while the whole transitioning time, give it 60 days. And I think they're surprised that when you're in it, you feel like, is this ever going to be okay? Will this ever settle down, and become their new normal? And then, fast forward about 90 days or so, everyone's transition time is different, of course, but they're surprised at, they say, oh, maybe come over after 2 o'clock today because I'm going to go to bingo.
Yeah.
Or, they come over and the visit's short because they have, made coffee plans with their friend down the hall, and so they're like, wow, I just can't believe that my mom's doing this. And so it's good surprises like that. And I try to remind families when they're in the hard part, it will get better.
I think that's very true. And this is particularly true for whether it's the memory care side or even if it's the assisted living side, but there's some memory issues there. And so this can be very difficult for the family because anybody that has memory issues and we change their environment, it is going to be upsetting to them. And so that transition process, and I try to prepare families for this, and it's difficult for families because I do feel like that first week is probably going to be bad, and they may beg to say, hey, I don't want to stay here or whatever, and sometimes it might be 2 weeks. And so the idea is you've got to give it some time because it can be better and much better and safer and all these other things, but that transition time is the very difficult time.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of guilt comes in, and that makes it hard. It's very emotional. If you hang in there, you get through it, but it takes a lot of people for that to be successful. So family is an intricate part of that.
I don't know how you'll feel about this piece of advice that I give sometimes, but my controversial advice is that sometimes, especially if the couple had been together for many years and they're very close and only one spouse is going into memory care, is to not have the other spouse visit for the first week or sometimes even 2 weeks, which sounds like a horrible thing to do, to say, I'm not going to abandon my spouse for a week or two. But that's sometimes what it takes to transition, because otherwise the spouse that's not in the care setting will just have an extreme amount of emotion because their spouse might be saying, take me home. Why aren't we going home? I've packed my bags, whatever the scenario is. And so sometimes it's really good to give the spouse with memory issues a little time to adjust before they get a visit from their husband or wife.
Absolutely.
So Jodi, give us some advice on what things that people should be looking at or what key elements they should be looking at in selecting a senior living residence.
So I always say, like we have kind of circling back before, take an intuitive route to approach to see how do you feel when you're in the community? Are the residents happy? Is the staff engaged? Is it clean? But also an analytical approach. What's the highest level of personal care they can provide? The financials, what's the highest amount you would pay if you needed that high level of care? And really, are they asking questions about you? Do you feel welcome there? Chances are, if they are, then they care about their residents, and they're there for all the right reasons.
I think that's a fantastic list. You can almost use that as a checklist to go through when you're looking at places. I particularly like the one about, kind of observing the employees there. There's some certain places that I go into and you observe the employees and they just seem very agitated and overworked and things like that. And you go into other places and it's just very positive and happy. And so just observe how, how the folks there seem to interact with people, because I think that will make a huge difference in your experience there based on sort of the culture and the attitude of the place.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot of like how you feel, and talk to the residents. I mean, they'll tell you, and then you can gauge from there on, your takeaways, of course, from those conversations with them. But, they live, this is their home wherever you're visiting. And many of them been there for years, so they're your best source of information.
I want to talk to you a little bit about, so if we have maybe the family member that's kind of been put in charge of helping out with things, and then they're getting resistance from others. So I want to talk about resistance from their parent, and who would be the resident there. And then in a minute, we'll talk about resistance from their siblings. But let's first talk about, so we have somebody that's been appointed, maybe power of attorney, that mom or dad really relies on her to make decisions and for advice, and trying to work with mom or dad to say, hey, this is the next transition in your life. We really need to be taking a look at this. But getting that fear and resistance from mom or dad. Do you have any advice for a family member in that situation?
Absolutely. And that's actually a conversation I have almost on a daily basis because, let's be real, no one is excited to move to any type of community. So I always stress to use what I call the next step approach. So leave your home as it is, just bring the necessities and go try a community, see what community living is like for at least 60 days. Most communities are month-to-month leasing. So if you hate it, after that trial period of, I'd say at least 60 to 90 days, then put in a 30-day notice and return home. In all the years I've worked in senior living, only less than a handful of people I've seen that use that approach, which is most everyone, return home. Most they enjoy not having to cook or clean. They know that someone's always there. And that's a huge burden off them. That's their safety. And they've maybe made some friends. And so they actually learn to like it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. We're often in that situation, unless there's a immediate financial crisis and we need to put the house up for sale immediately or something like that. I often recommend, let's just take a pause on the house. You guys can go by and check on the house, every couple of days, but why don't we just not worry about the house right now? Give it a little bit of time. That will give mom or dad a little bit more confidence that they have, that they have options. So I think that's an excellent point.
Many people just come try and stay for the winter. And then, when spring rolls around and they decide to stay, at that point, their families move in their things and then it becomes a permanent move.
Yeah, that's very, very timely as we're recording this podcast, but we're getting into where it's going to become fall pretty soon. And that's a great idea of not having to worry about shoveling the walk or worrying about slipping and falling on going out to get the mail and all of those details. So that's a great option to say, well, at least consider it for the winter and then we'll see where it goes from there. The other side of it is when we have siblings. And so this can be a number of things. This can be well-intentioned siblings that are all involved and everybody has their own ideas, but very often it's siblings that aren't particularly involved, and it's not necessarily their fault. They might live out of state or live out of town, and so they're not really seeing they don't understand. They're in a bit denial about the capabilities of someone living alone, their parent living alone. And I have a little, tease that I give. I call it seagulls. Seagulls, they fly in from out of town. They poop all over everything and then they fly out. But this happens too often that we've got the family, the close family that are right there, might live next door, might even live in the house, might live down the street or in the same neighborhood. They see what's going on with mom or dad. And then they tell their siblings, hey, we've got this great plan. There's this great facility. They're going to take care of. They're going to provide great meals. They're going to make sure that there's people there to help mom. And then the siblings come in from out of town and they say, no, my mom's never going to wherever. And they just don't necessarily understand the nuance of what mom's needs are. And would you have any advice for families that, the well-intentioned siblings are maybe misplaced because they don't have a good hands-on in-person understanding of what's going on?
Absolutely. I always recommend that the primary caregivers, the kids that are in town and handling the day-to-day, that they keep a log of everything and anything. Do you have a home care provider that comes in to be with mom, for a few hours a day? How often are they coming? Are things coming up and they're calling in? And how often is mom getting visitors, friends or family coming over day to day? The falls, are the falls becoming more frequent? It just takes one fall to get, to break a hip, and then look where you're at. And then in addition to the log, encouraging family members to, schedule virtual visits with communities, because I think I talk to a lot of family members out of town, out of state, that don't realize what the day-to-day looks like, and kind of talking to people that aren't in your family about the differences, home versus living in a community, sometimes is eye-opening and makes them a little more open to trying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think being a family caregiver is much more difficult than anybody imagines it to be until you've lived it. It's really hard to understand how difficult it is. And I tell this to families where they have a sibling that's doing that, and the other siblings aren't really appreciative of that. And I also tell it to those folks that they say, well, we're just going to take it on. We're going to take mom into our home, which is great. I never discourage that. But what I do try to warn them is this is probably going to be a lot harder than you imagine it to be, especially, if your parent is incontinent and we have to, deal with those issues and bathroom issues and all those types of things. It can be very difficult and very stressful.
Absolutely. And, there's a reason why every community has a lot of caregivers and a lot of shifts, because there's a lot of entities to caregiving, the social emotional side and the physical caregiving side.
Talk to me a little bit about what that logistical process looks like. So if families decided, okay, mom's going to move into Brookdale and we're going to move in next week, is there anything they need to do in preparation for that? What does that process look like?
So our nurse always goes out to usually wherever someone's most comfortable. Usually they're going out to their home, and families present, and it's learning health history and the day-to-day things. When do you like to take a shower? Because if us helping them in the shower is part of their care plan, then we want to build it around their preferences. It's changed enough to move, so we don't want to change the day-to-day things. When they get up, when they go to bed, when they like to take showers, what do they like to eat for breakfast? What are their comfort foods when they're not feeling good? Things like that. And it also gives the families opportunity to ask clinical questions that they may have not had a chance to ask during their visit.
Nice.
And the primary care physician then completes a plan of care form, which is a very basic Brookdale standard form, medications, things like that. They get a chest x-ray, which is pretty standard protocol for any community. It's just clear from TB. And then at that point, we talk about the physical move-in date.
Oh. So it sounds like you kind of help them out all the way along the way.
Absolutely. Sounds like a lot, but it's actually a very smooth process.
Yeah, right. Well, especially with the help of the community, it's not all on the family to organize all of that, right?
Absolutely. Right.
So I promised earlier we were going to talk about this, and I want you to kind of clarify the different levels of care. And I know that there's at least a couple of levels of care at Brookdale here in Grand Blanc, but you can kind of walk us through the different levels of care and what they really kind of mean versus independent versus assisted and memory and skilled and all of that.
So independent living communities, we have a lot of partners in the area. Brookdale does have independent, but not in this area. That's a third party provider. They're full apartments. So many people move from their home to an independent living community as the first step to downsize. When they start to need a higher level of care, that's when they make another move to assisted living, so that it all falls under one umbrella. You can ask the director at an assisted living community anything from how your mom likes their coffee to when did they last see their primary care physician and what was the outcome of that visit. So just one go-to and or the
Right.
nurse if the community has a nurse.
So the
And
care is provided as part of the arrangement as opposed to independent, where we have one company for care and one company for room and board, right?
correct. Some people skip that step to avoid a double move and move directly from home into an assisted living community, even if they don't need personal care yet. Typically, assisted living communities are licensed. So if they have a long-term care insurance plan, they can utilize that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then, like, as we've talked about before, as they need the care, then they can build their care plan.
And then distinguish the assisted living from the memory care.
So in addition to it being licensed, they're smaller living spaces, but that's on purpose. Really avoiding isolation for safety, less living space areas, avoid fall prevention. And, we hope that you consider this whole community your home and don't stay much in your room. Of course, it's your choice. So kitchenettes, but not a full kitchen, not a full apartment.
And there's extra protections for someone that might get confused and wander, right?
Absolutely. So should someone need another extra level of cognitive support, our memory care community is secured. And so if someone, their dementia begins to progress, it's an easy transfer next door to our memory care versus being able to come and go over here at assisted living.
Right. Very good. So sometimes that's a really important step too, because number one priority is going to be safety for everyone. And if we are worried about somebody that does get a little confused and might wander away, we need that extra level of security. So
absolutely. And you want, staff that is trained in specialized dementia care.
And I think that's a really important element that a lot of people overlook, that if if the staff is used to working with people with physical ailments and physical restrictions, and then every once in a while they have somebody with memory issues, well, that can get any family member that's ever had a parent or a spouse that has any form of dementia knows that it can get very, very frustrating. And to have the staff that is focused on everybody there is going to have some level of dementia, some level of memory issues, that can be very helpful because they understand what's going on. They have to have a higher degree of patience and consistency. And I think that is a really positive element of memory care in that situation.
Absolutely. And that's kind of another stigma too, is, my mom has to move to a memory care. That's too bad. No, actually, she's getting engaged to, slow the progress. So it's, there's a dementia specific program that's followed. There's a lot of support because everyone's journey is different and what that's going to look like. So again, it's just a higher level of support. It's not a negative thing at all.
I think that's very true. And I often advise families that they're a little bit worried about the memory issues, or maybe the memory issues have advanced to a certain level. And I will tell them, in my experience, and obviously everybody's situation is different, but in my experience, we put that parent in a situation where they have more socialization, more people to talk to, more activities, and their memory improves. I'm not going to say, I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to say that that's necessarily going to happen, but in my experience, my observation, it happens a good portion of the time that you get more activity, you get more socialization, and your memory improves.
Absolutely. And your table mate in the dining room may not know what you're saying, or you might not be able to verbalize correctly, but it doesn't matter. Everyone is on some type of journey that, qualifies them to be living their best life there. And so it is amazing to see, how they progress, again, with usually in the first 90 days in families. And it's awesome for me too, because I've seen them in the home environment before they come to us, and then fast forward 90 days. And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you coming in today and doing our podcast. I do have one other question I want you to address. And so we've all struggled quite a bit with adjusting to some of the changes and circumstances and staffing issues with regard to the pandemic and COVID. So I was hoping you could address, how Brookdale's handling that and how we're dealing with staffing issues and things like that.
Absolutely. So with Brookdale being, such a large senior living provider, we have been incredibly blessed not to ever be short on supplies, whether it's food or masks or whatever, because we have nationwide suppliers. On my particular campus here, we have a very strong core team that has some longevity, which has been a blessing in regards to, staffing through the COVID craziness and being able to maintain that quality level of care. One challenge that continues to this day is that people are waiting too long to move from their home.
Right.
Because they're scared, and because this has gone on for so long, isolating in their homes has sort of become like their new normal, and it's quite sad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a good point to say that, the Brookdale has the resources to be able to do that. And the thing that I think is a real value that you have is you said you have some longevity in the staff. I think that's probably more important than anything else, is to have the consistency of that staff that is not turning over every month or every other month.
Exactly. There's some new beautiful communities that are popping up, everywhere in every town. And it's when it comes down to it, if there's not a strong core team, then it's not going to go smoothly.
Yeah, there's going to be some
no matter what it
difficulties
looks
there.
like. Right.
Well, Jodi, I appreciate you so much informing us and talking to our audience here. So thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
I want to remind everybody that if you are a social worker or administrator or a caseworker, we do have our annual training that we do for social workers, nursing home administrators, and caseworkers that we call our Elder Law and Advocacy Boot Camp. We do have, if you want to save the date, we have that scheduled now for April 21st. It's a Friday. And it's going to be April 21st, 2023 from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we are applying for 5 continuing education credits for social workers, nursing home administrators, and caseworkers. So thank you so much. And we'll hope you come back to the next Advice from Your Advocates.